the four faces that you folks would be seeing while you are engaging with the Bangalore SaaS Talk chapter. We are there to support you and help you out in any of your questions through this particular session and as well as after this session. So, quick introduction about SaaS Talk is a London-based organization whose mission is to help SaaS companies get more traction, grow, as well as scale. They deliver a flagship conference in Europe. Primarily last year it was in Dublin, and they had almost 4,000 plus attendees. And in this year, if COVID would not have happened, we would have had our regional conferences in North America, Asia, Latin, and Australasia. So the aim is to gather SaaS leaders, founders, execs, and investors to create opportunities, network, and share relevant, actionable knowledge, challenges, and learnings. SaaS Local is a movement of SaaS professionals, founders, and investors gathering on a regular basis, helping the local SaaS communities to share the best practices and network and connect with SaaS professionals. Now, while choosing this particular topic, SaaS from India, we deliberated as to why this is the right time in 2020. Of course, there are a bunch of macroeconomic trends that are happening. COVID-19 has accelerated the digital transformation across all spheres. And like in 2007, 8, 9, and 10, when recession was happening, there was an array of SaaS companies coming up in different parts of the world. Slack was in 2008, Airbnb was in 2008, then Slack and Stripe in 2009 and 2010. So in 2020 and 2021, we expect a bunch of SaaS unicorns sprouting in different parts of the world, US, China, as well as in India. Now, India has we already have a SaaS heritage where STEM background candidates are there. The large talent pool of close to 3+ million software developers and 100K plus SaaS developers is supporting this landscape. And the VC ecosystem's interest is there because they're looking into trends and data insights as well. In the US, last year, SaaS was the sector that had maximum number of unicorns. And of course, if you draw parlance with the Indian ecosystem, we expect a bunch of SaaS unicorns coming in the next 2 years as well. Currently, we have 6. The obvious ones are Freshworks, Druva, as well as Postman and HighRadius. With the policies coming from the government, we see a lot of innovation happening in the ecosystem, and we expect a lot of SaaS founders as well as investors to be connected in this platform as well. With this note, I will give the podium to Gokul Suresh to introduce to our keynote speakers.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Aswat. I think that did help in setting a tone for the day, right? And thanks for giving a gist about SaaS Talk, right? So SaaS Talk is, again, new to India, and we want to scale up in physically as well as soon as everything opens up, right? So, and thanks to everyone for joining in. We have some really insightful sessions with a lot of actionable takeaways planned today. And so let's get started with that, right? Before I jump into it, as Saswat said, I'm the other city leader for SaaS Talk Bangalore, and also the first market at WhatFix. Now, anything related to SaaS Talk, you can reach out to either of us or the organizing community with Sunil and Vishwajit, right? And I'll be the host for the rest of the event. And as you may have already noticed by now, all attendees are muted by default. And when questions do come into your mind, just put them on the chat window, and we'll be curating them throughout the session and addressing it in the Q&A session right after the first fireside chat, right? So a quick sneak peek into the agenda, we'll start with the story of Postman, the newest SaaS unicorn from India. And right after that, we have a panel discussion about talent, scale, growth, and building a global SaaS brand from India. And to end with, we have, based on the time that we have, we'll also open up a channel for you to candidly network with each other, right? So let's get started then. Indian SaaS unicorn, Postman, right? An API development platform used by over 11 million developers in more than 500,000 companies around the world, right? It's a story that every SaaS professional in India wants to know. And I guess if you're already following Postman, most of the initial part of the journey from a side project of the co-founders, Abhinav Asthana and Ankit Sopti, to $1 million startup. I mean, that's just a Google search away. So in today's session, we wanted to take it up a notch. For that, we have Samir Brij Verma, who is the managing director at Nexus Venture Partners. He has been an early stage investor in about 38 companies, which has led investment for companies like Unacademy, Zolo, Hasura, which recently got funding again, Roadrunner, and also Postman, right? So Samir will be hosting the co-founder and the CTO of Postman, Ankit Sopti, in a fireside chat about the company. Only difference this time, let's hear about the story of how Postman crossed the chasm and scaled to one of the biggest unicorns in India, in Indian SaaS particularly. So Samir and Ankit, thanks a lot for doing this. Welcome to the show. We're really excited for the session.
Thank you, Gokul. Thanks so much for having us over. It's a pleasure to be here and a privilege as well. What's more is it's great to have Ankit and talk about the story, right? The Postman story. And there's so much to cover in this conversation. And we were talking about it that we have 35 minutes to go over the journey, and so we'll try and condense that and more importantly get to the Q&A section where we'll try and cover more specific pointed questions. And I'm sure there's so much for all of us to learn from Ankit and the entire Postman team. So truly excited to be here. Thanks for having us over.
Awesome.
And,
so Samir,
thanks for the kind words. And
so I'll leave it to you, Samir. I think you can take the stage. You can set the stage
Sure.
with Ankit and start over with that. Yeah. Awesome.
Absolutely. So Ankit, thanks once again for being here. It's been an honor and a privilege to have worked with the team, since its very inception. We'll take a few minutes and step back and would love to have you talk about the origins of Postman and how it got started in 2012. How did you come together? How do you know the other founders? As well as why did you decide to do this full time in 2014, raise money, build a company around it? So that'd be really, really useful to set a context around how you started, and then we'll go from there.
Awesome. All right. So first of all, Gokul, thank you so much for the kind introduction, and I'm really excited to be here. It's always happy to talk to the community and share back with whatever learnings or insights that we have gotten from our journey. Right. So let's start about talking about Postman itself, right? And that journey actually starts back in 2009. So at 2009, in both Abhinav and my first job, we met together at Yahoo. And at that point in time, we were pretty much just fresh out of college, starting out, and we were, incorporated into a team, and we were building like a front-end application for something that we were building out within the organization for one of the background platform teams for Yahoo itself. And a common theme to that whole thing was, answering the question around, because we were building a front end on top of an existing API that the rest of the team had built out. A lot of the times, the question that we were answering was, hey, where is the API? What is the API? Has it changed? And, we wasted a lot of time just going back and forth on this whole conversation. And everybody around us, the people that we were learning from, our mentors, our managers, were using a command line tool called as curl for debugging. And they used to have these curl commands in text files, and they would share them for documentation over Yahoo chat. And curl itself was hard to use. And for us, even considering the relative naivety at that point in time, this was bothersome because we could see the value of APIs. And for something as critical as APIs, fundamentally powering the entire feeds platform of a company at the scale of Yahoo, we were using tools that were very hard to use and fairly cumbersome. And this was a theme that we continued seeing across organizations over the next 3 years as we moved around into a different role as well. And so in 2012, to scratch this itch fundamentally, we did what every lazy developer does and built a side project. And that is how the first version of Postman was born. We gave it to people around us and physically saw their experience improved, saw them becoming more productive, their API development processes becoming easier. So encouraged by this, what we did was we put it up on the Chrome web store, and that took off like crazy. Developers, started using it, recommending it. The community itself was growing insanely. I mean, it was really fun time because we were learning so much about HTTP, about REST, about APIs through community questions and feature requests. And we very quickly grew to from 0 to 500,000 users in almost every single country in the world. And yeah, we were not even a real company yet. In fact, at this point in time, figuring out, and this is, I would quote Abhinav's story here, because he was working towards the end of about 2014, started 2014. He had left his earlier startup and started working on Postman full time, while I was supporting him as a side project. So, and a very real concern came out around that time is how do you pay rent? How do you, the real things in the world. And this was kind of antithetical to this whole thing that was going on the other side, where, people were constantly barraging us with questions, feature requests, and so on, right? And, so we like, okay, and we kind of had to answer this very interesting question that, does developer love equate to, money? And this
Right.
was an interesting time because around this time, I used to live in Bombay, Abhinav was in Bangalore, and he actually took a bus journey, like a 26, 27-hour bus journey from Bangalore because he couldn't afford to like buy a flight ticket at that point in time to come meet me in Bombay and just discuss everything that was going on with Postman. And at that point in time, something really interesting happened. A large team, somewhere, I guess somewhere in the US, probably Seattle, if I'm not wrong, actually sent us a $500 check, basically talking completely unsolicited, because it was basically with a message, almost apologetic, that Postman is so great, and we just don't want development to stop. And I hope this takes you forward in your journey, whatever it does, just continue developing it. And that was very, very fascinating. And around the time, we also had started just dipping our toes into monetization by adding an additional functionality to the product with an in-app purchase, which also saw a lot of traction, right? So around
Jetpacks, yeah.
Jetpacks, yes, absolutely. So around the time, I think during that trip to Bombay, where we sat down and discussed, we also met you, Samir, in that trip. And what we realized was that we were solving a very real problem, which was faced by many people around the world. It also clearly had potential for generating revenue because, we were now seeing the value that people had in terms of tools that they would like to pay for. And developers like paying for productivity. And also, we had also realized that we had not really solved the problem which we had originally faced back at Yahoo, which was around collaboration. Because APIs are inherently collaborative, they connect systems together, they connect people together as they're developing. And however, the tooling itself was non-existent. So that point in time is when we decided to take this journey full time, start this as a company, and about 2.5 years after the first version of the product came out, and about 650,000 users at that point in time, we created Postman, the company.
And why do you call it Postman?
So in the REST vocabulary, or in the HTTP vocabulary to be more specific, you have these verbs. So the post verb basically means to create. So Postman allows you to create. So that's where the meaning comes in. Yeah.
Got it. So, starting a developer tool company out of India, you had a lot of traction. You're a Chrome plugin at that point of time. And I must, for the benefit of the audience, I must say that Postman is one company that when I spoke to the founders for the first time, from day zero, they've always had a vision around how this would evolve, and it's pretty uncanny that the vision hasn't changed. And it's amazing how the team has been able to execute, over the last few years. From day zero, how you had a broader picture and broader vision around achieving your goals and being a sort of an API development lifecycle product, right? And not just just starting out with testing, but going much beyond that, right? So early days, 2014, you raised money and you want to build a developer tools company out of India. Not too many parallel companies to look at. What was going on in your head? How did you have to make this very different, right? I mean, developers, as you know, don't like being sold stuff, right? So you need things to be bottoms up. You need bottoms up adoption. You need customer love. You need a very unique culture. There were 3 of you around the table when you started. So maybe if you take the next few minutes, talk about what were the special things that you really, really emphasized on in terms of creating the secret sauce that has helped you to be successful so far. I know that the foundation for that started really, really early in the journey, but I'm sure the audience would love to understand, how did that really happen, right? What were the things that you really needed to have for product-led growth, the culture, all of that stuff. So, over to you, Ankit, in terms of describing, what were the things that were going through your mind to build this out of India?
Absolutely. So I think it's a deep question. So I think, try and break it down into 3 parts and then answer from that, right? I'm going to start with the first one, which sort of sets the context of where we are right now, right? So, and I'm going to call that, let's say, reach, right? So, at this point in time, as Gokul very correctly mentioned, right, Postman is now used by more than 11 million developers in more than 500,000 organizations in most parts of the world. And that in the organizations actually include more than 98% of the Fortune 500, right? And I mean, if you really were to think about it, right, like Postman's journey is tied closely to the evolution of APIs and how they have taken center stage in modern software. So when we were building out the first version of the product, APIs were still very nascent in adoption. A few companies and tools existed in the API ecosystem, but they were primarily addressing the concerns around public APIs. And that made sense because companies were putting out public APIs for the first time, and they wanted to have a certain sense of reliability and resilience into the systems, and they were willing to pay for that, right? In fact, funnily enough, the first time ever that we created a sales deck, right, we had this little iceberg slide. I know you have never seen a capital raise deck from us. So I think the first time we ever created a deck was a sales one.
But I do
So
remember that deck, right? I do
Yes.
remember that iceberg deck really, really well.
Yeah. So we used to have this iceberg slide where it basically went like, 99% of the APIs are private, whereas only 1% of the APIs are public, which was true back then. And when Postman came into existence, because there weren't a lot of companies actually solving this problem of 99% APIs. And even right now, it's really interesting to see that, for most of our customers and user base that we talk to, that number is still anywhere between 90 to 99%, depending on the size and the maturity of the organization itself, right? However, over the last, let's say, since the starting of Postman, the product, 2012, over the last 8 years, the API ecosystem itself has evolved. Every company in the world is now building APIs, regardless of sector, industry, or vertical. And there are many trends that drive that. The proliferation of cloud providers, more and more systems are coming to the public cloud. You see more decomposed systems being built out, like microservices or serverless, which means that with decomposed applications, what was typically done by functional calls is now being done by APIs. And yes, absolutely right. And the third is the growth of the SaaS companies itself, because more functionality is being decomposed so that people can focus on building out their core competencies while structurally and programmatically outsourcing the rest through the power of APIs. And this is where you see companies like Stripe, Twilio come up, right? So I think we're also, from our perspective, we are at the starting point of making everybody realize how big this really is. And and this is what I define as the opportunity that exists in front of Postman right now, right? So when we started out, we wanted to solve a real problem, right? It was not, the objective was not to create a company specifically. We wanted to solve a problem that was very, very apparent in front of us and something that we had faced firsthand and continue to face, right? And we wanted to create real world impact by creating a right solution. For me, honestly, Postman was my first time out of a conventional job. And for Abhinav, and by the way, I'll add this very specifically, thankfully, it was his second. Because that made him, in a way, very clear about what not to do from day one, more than what not to do from day one, right? And this sort of retrospectively looking at this sort of baggage-free approach of, what is expected of a company, or I guess what is expected of an Indian company, was never something that even like entered our brainstream. I don't think we ever had a conversation about that, right? Because we wanted to solve the problem that was in front of us. We had enough signals to see that the problem was both global and it also was across industries, sector, or vertical, right? And we just, right? Yeah. And we very inherently, I just believe maybe that's how we are, but we wanted to create a best-in-class product that solves the consistently evolving problem of APIs in the API ecosystem in a very effective way. And I think we did know that we had the capability and subsequently also like an evolving context that we were learning more and more from our community to do exactly that. So what we did was, I think, since again, we didn't know any better, I guess, right? We stuck to the basics of just standard first principles thinking about realizing what was important to us, right? And we had a lot of discussions about that. The first aspect that we outlined was very important. And I think that kind of like has a good, set of things coming together, because in my previous role, I was playing with the role of a product manager, and Abhinav definitely had a lot of product, well, he's building like something that was used by more than 500,000 people. So yeah, there's a good sense of product there, right? So we focused on this and we settled down on this one very important principle, this idea of jobs to be done. that we borrowed from Clayton Christensen, a professor at Harvard, which basically speaks about a very simple concept when it comes to product thinking, that your objective needs to be to create better users, not better products. And you see that very, easily reflected in, let's say the camera industry, right? So you have, if you see the camera industry and the way that it has evolved over the last 10 years, right? Like people like me who have no sense of, positioning, framing, whatever focal length or whatever that might be, right? I can just switch on my portrait mode, take a picture, and I'm a better photographer than what I used to be. Right. And so that jobs to be done framework is something that we internalize. The second thing that we internalize,
I must add, jobs to be done while abstracting complexity. I mean, that's what beautiful products are about.
Absolutely, right? Yeah. And I was actually going to come to that point. So let's jump onto that point right now, right? The second aspect was actually the focus on simplicity, right? For us, I think one of the things that we wanted to do, and I was not sure why, or we were not sure why, that developer tools had that inherent complexity built in. Maybe it was because, developers like complexity, but, I think from our perspective, we just wanted to keep it very simple. We've always considered for simplicity to be a feature, even and especially as the use cases get more complex, right? And you combine these two things together by, always understanding the why, not just the what and the how. Like something that we borrowed from, for the book, but there's a book called Start With Why. I forgot the name of the author right now. But I think just focusing on the why always, understanding why somebody is asking for a feature or a particular aspect, because a lot of the stuff that we built were incoming requests, but we never took it just at face value. We always understood why somebody was asking for something and then built the what and the how to do that, right? And I think, the other aspect that we always wanted to do, probably again, because we didn't know any better, was to think of your team like a product and designing your organization to support that. What is the MVP of your team at any stage? How do you think about the multiple different people or the multiple different personas that interface with your team at any point in time? And finally, I think, just do the right thing, which is right by our customers and users, right by our team, keeping in mind that, the definition of right itself is evolving. As problem statements evolve, as constraints evolve, what is right changes, right? And this is why actually, interestingly enough, we in the organization, we banned the use of the word best practices. We actually use the word better practices, right? Because nothing can be best without acknowledging that context, time continuum that I always refer back to.
That's right. It's a continuum. It's not a finite point, right? It's always evolving.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think at the end, the other thing we want to just do this in an organic, sustainable way so that we are able to create that long-term impact, because we realize that this API ecosystem is very prominent and will only grow. And for us to align with that growth of the API ecosystem as an organization, we had to do this. We had to do it sustainably and not grow too fast or burn too much to get to that point.
Got it. No, that's very useful. It gives deep insights for any entrepreneur thinking about building a company out, whether it's in DevTools or in any other way. The why is the most important question in anything, right? And as you pointed out, understanding what the customer really needs, not what they want. I think there's a distinction there in some ways, because and that's where there's complexity which is infused in any system. So understanding the need very, very deeply and then solving for that is critical. So, I know we could spend a lot of time talking about this, but, if you look at the evolution of the company, there's a 0 to 1 phase where you get sort of product market fit. There's, you want to call it from a 1 to a 10 sort of a scale up phase. And then there is the real rapid scaling phase, which is 10 to 100. If you have to divide your journey as a company, I know it's been since you formally started, it's been about 6 years now. If you had to talk about, the company growing through these 3 phases and the respective inflection points across the journey in these 3 phases, let's take 3 dimensions, right? Your product-led growth strategy, the organization, and the go-to-market playbook. How have they evolved if you take these 3 dimensions across the 0 to 1, 1 to 10, and the current 10 to 100 phase that you're in right now? I'm sure that'll be really, really useful, and I think will really help the audience kind of identify where they are in this and ask you more specific questions in the Q&A section as well.
Got it. Awesome. Sorry, I took some notes so I don't forget. Okay. So let's go to the first journey, which is 0 to 1, right? I think that's about the time when we started out. And for Postman, I'm going to start about 0 to 1, both from the point where the product itself came into being, because I think the extension was till the point, where we actually got to that one even after we started the company. And the company's origins is somewhere in between, right? So let's talk about the product-led growth. So if I really think about like why, and if I were to retroactively attribute like why Postman grew from a product perspective, I touched upon simplicity, jobs to be done, and making sure that we started with why at all times, right? But the other one aspect to that was I think always attributed to the need, because Postman was a product that was built by developers for developers, and it spread pretty much through word of mouth because you were seeing the similar use cases constantly being incorporated in more. The second aspect to, I think, product-led growth would definitely be, I think, the inherent virality that existed in the product. But the virality existed, which was organic. It was not forced. It was not something that virality created through hacking human psychology, but virality created because it created value as you extended from a single user using the product to multiple people collaborating around APIs. Again, tying back to the fact that APIs are inherently collaborative. Right. I think the third aspect, and one I think that we did pretty well, again through first principles thinking, was actually around creating advocates of Postman through multiple mediums. Individuals being advocates, influencers being advocates, and also like affiliation. So one of the things that we did from day one is, and I remember like this is a conversation that you and I had in at your office in Bombay when we met first time, right? Which is that 500,000 users, all these companies, eBay using it, all these companies using it, right? What does your team look like? And I remember saying that, Abhinav and I looking at each other saying, this is it. And I think, and I think you had asked that question at that point in time, right? Like, do you guys sleep? And actually the answer was very legitimately no at that point in time, because I think for the amount of time that we were spending making sure that we were listening to the community that we were creating and learning from it, right? And I think we eventually made this into a funnel of critics, admirers, and advocates. People going through this funnel within the organization where people who are the most critical, you have to understand why they're critical. Really rely on what you're building to do what they are doing. And the minute you break a workflow or break something that they do, right, they will criticize it, and that's good. One thing that we did in during the 0 to 1 stage was to listen to them, understand why they were asking something, and actually fix it really quickly. And that helped us create these critics, to these admirers who realize that not just is something that is an integral part of my workflow, the team is one that listens to what I'm saying and improves the product for me, makes me better at my job. Right. And those people eventually converted into advocates. And these were very structured communication that we were having. And all three of us as founders did that subsequently. And this is something that we continued doing, that no matter who would join the company, they would be looking into all of these aspects around, looking at critics and solving problems as quickly as possible. Right. So I think those were factors that were very important in building that product, keeping in mind simplicity and jobs to be done as well. Organizationally, 0 to 1, my recommendation has always been nothing else matters. All you need to do at this point in time is to identify product market fit as quickly as possible, right? And to do that, you need to ship as quickly as possible. You need to iterate quickly, learn from it, and go back. And then, I would say, I would put it actually as much as that, you earn the privilege of doing that whole thing all over again, but with increased complexity. Right. So I think that's the way that we started approaching this idea, and we wanted to very consciously hire the right people within the organization to support that, who thought about that. Not just, okay, that, we'll hire developers. We actually, the first person that we hired in Postman was actually a designer, because of the importance of user experience that we had. We had a user experience designer. Yeah, you actually interviewed that guy. Right. And
I know. I know the hoops that we had to run over to get her involved, and it wasn't straightforward at all. But she added immense amount of value in that phase.
Absolutely.
Immense amount of value.
Absolutely right. So I think the other thing that we did from an organizational perspective in the 0 to 1 journey was actually focusing on our company's culture. Now, this is something that I think I credit to Abhinav very strongly, and probably something that he learned from his past experience was, that actually when we were in the process starting out, and even before starting the company, when I had moved to Bangalore, we used to work together on a 1-bedroom apartment, literally side by side. We had 2 tables. In fact, my table was actually a bookshelf converted into a table at that point in time. Right. And what we didn't have was actually proper tables, but what we did create was a culture code. right? Something, it was kind of like a code that we created to just make the reasoning between the three of us consistent and guide as we took decisions, right? And that is something that subsequently became the values of the organization, right, as we grew, and something that we kept evolving, right? Because we feel like values become very important, right? Like values are the core bedrock on which you create your organization. Values bring a bunch of misfits together that fit together in your organization because they're solving this unique mission and vision that you have for your team. And they have been, something that we have done to guide who we hire, how we grow people, how we stay true to what we stand for. And unfortunately, I have seen also that, like this is something that founders need to do. And I'm glad Abhinav taught me that because, I have seen a lot of organizations where sometimes I've seen marketing teams do it, sometimes I'm seeing HR teams do it. And it's not something that you should outsource. Like values are a reflection of the founders.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, values are a reflection of the founders because if they are not, right, you will be inconsistent with them soon enough as a founder. And if they don't embody who you are. And creating a culture is very hard. Keeping it intact is harder, right? And it's very important to make sure that it's something that is a part of everything that you do. And I feel this is a 0 to 1 design problem, not something that you do when you are 50 plus people, which doesn't make sense, right? And finally, on the third aspect, from the go-to-market perspective, I think the same thing, right? Put it in front of people as quickly as possible. When we started the company, we had just started building out that collaboration platform. We code completed it, put it up on a beta in 3 months. It was an entire platform, and for the first time, we were adding server-side capability to 500,000 users. Like in fact, when our servers went live, we had 500,000 people logging in on day one. That was not easy, but we put it up in front of as quickly as possible so that we could get real feedback from real people as quickly as possible. And I think this is an interesting thing that sort of identified our inflection point to the next stage as well, because a substantial percentage of the people who went through this elongated beta, we actually ran in beta for almost 9 months, and people who went into this with this thing, people who were using the product at the time when we flipped the switch and made this a paid thing or moved out of beta, a substantial percentage of the base converted, which for us was validation, right?
That's right.
Yeah. So I think, yeah, please.
I still remember that phase, how complex it was, right? On the back end with, millions of collection requests and things like that. It was, I still remember you guys slogging through the night at that point of time, trying to get it right. And, and bringing on Shamashish also, who helped in that journey.
And by the way, being a product guy who had just done a business degree before that, it was fascinating for me to code so much of it. We have not coded for 2 years before that.
I remember. I remember that phase.
That was fascinating.
Absolutely.
Right? But yeah, so I think,
when
we went to the 1 to 10, I think at least for SaaS companies, the way 0 to 1, 1 to 10 is defined is basically, $1 million in ARR. I think that's the right proxy for that, right? So as we moved into the 0 to 1 to 1 to 10 stage, when we knew that we had product market fit, not just for the core Postman product, but also for the collaboration system that we were building out, it was important for us to scale the 0 to 1. Because now we were increasingly moving towards a philosophy of distributed decision making while doing all of the above, where all the decisions were not being taken by me or Abhinav or Shamshish as such, right? And also from a need perspective, like if I go back to the product-led growth elements that I mentioned earlier, which was around need and virality and so on, right? So I think from a need perspective, it was not just catering to individual need. We are now looking at teams, small teams, which meant that you were seeing more and more personas come into the system. And the other aspect was one around continuous impact. We actually ship regularly and continuously end up creating impact. On the product side, we continued retaining the tenets of simplicity. And actually, this is around the time when we integrated the idea of jobs to be done into our vocabulary so that we could have consistency in the way that we were taking decisions. Because I felt that, we needed something to decentralize the knowledge within the organization, right? And in terms of now the team, we definitely had to evolve the team, both the individuals that we had within the team and also the people that we were hiring subsequently, both aligning to values. But we had to realize that we were not just prototyping anymore. We had to build more resilience into the organization. And even though at this point in time,
That's right.
a lot of it was being driven through top-down decision-making, but more towards organizing and aligning people towards singular organizational goals. And that part is important because if we were too fragmented in this stage, we would have gone down multiple paths and not be able to do that. From a go-to-market side at this point in time, we actually structured our evangelism process, the way that we reached out to the community. And what we wanted to do is, because we learned so much from the community, it was always been a very important part of who we are. We created more processes and systems to actually structuredly mobilize the community that we had. And I would say the other aspect from a go-to-market side at this point was definitely, I think, focusing more on the self-serve workflows for us rather than sales-serve. But this is a time at which we utilize to learn how to build our sales muscle at this stage, because we started focusing on more sales ops roles, which bridges the gap and removes the friction that typically, or inefficiencies, if I had to call them, from people who are willing to consume the product and buy it, and the people that exist in between the purchaser, right? And just getting the end product in front of customers as quickly as possible, while making sure the product is good enough that people want to pay for it and consume it. And those are some of the things that we definitely did at that point in time. But this time, actually, I'll be honest, right? The 0 to 1, 1 to 10 was a little bit more blurry. We knew what we were doing. But the 1 to 10 and 10 to 100 is when we were very, very conscious of these inflection points and realizing that there were things that were changing, and the way that we had to operate also had to change. And primarily attributing to the fact that, to identify the balance between centralized and decentralized decision making, because no longer we could have taken uniform decisions at the top and have everybody execute on that singular vision, because we now do multiple things simultaneously. And how do you identify the balance? How do you evolve the team? How do you create newer functions? How do you focus on quality and performance? How do you have the balance between centralized decision making? We actually reorganized our organization before even that inflection point hit to support that, right? And at that point in time, we created certain structures and brought in processes so that we could align top-down strategic with these bottom-up tactical objectives that people could implement, right? And teams were designed now at this point in time to be responsible for their own focus areas and to also be accountable for it. They were expected to own that and deliver on it. We obviously, at this point in time, started growing a marketing function, doing more demand generation, better collateral, more events. Obviously, Postman is a very global organization, so doing events at a global scale was very important. And the product itself had to be repositioned from a simple developer-focused tool to a multi-persona, comprehensive API development platform, right? We grew our DevRel functions, we grew our sales functions, and increasingly have been relying on our land and expand strategy, because we do have the land in a lot of companies, and we just have to make sure that how we build the expand strategy to use all of this together. And a lot of it, even starting from the 1 to 10 stage, I should have mentioned earlier, was on these underlying pinnings of a strong data stack, making sure that we were always ahead of what we needed from a data perspective. So organizationally, we democratized data so that people could take decisions independently without relying on the independent data function, but also rely on the fact that there's stability and inherent value in that.
Yeah, and as you rightly pointed out, I remember Anuja and team were working on the plumbing and the telemetry in the system. That was super important, so that that was the organizational view, and you were not having opinions, but you're taking data-driven decisions across the org. That's super helpful. I think that sets a beautiful context, and of course, just adding to the one point that in the last phase, and that's unfolding, towards somewhere in the crossover, the inflection point between 1 to 10 and 10 to where you're going now. Also, you've also had to position yourself at a more strategic level towards the API development environment, and so that there's a buyer there as well. So adding that, right, the positioning towards market has also evolved, to be a lot more strategic from a buyer perspective. And then of course both are converging as you're going from developers within individual developers to kind of teams within different teams collaborating to now getting towards the organization thing. So getting that sales motion is a work in progress, and it's also something that you're working on right now, and definitely you're seeing phenomenal traction on that, but it's constantly evolving. So okay, thanks for sharing that perspective. It's very useful across these 3 dimensions. So as I've had a ringside view towards this. It's been phenomenal seeing how you guys have scaled in this journey as founders, right? Would love to understand how did you scale yourself? With something which is got 1/3 of market share globally in some ways, purely organically, and so much customer love and community and all of that stuff. how do you, as all of you, the three of you, and how did you scale yourself, right? I mean, as I've always wondered about that, because I've seen you constantly learn and evolve. But how did you do that? Love to understand that. And this is a question for me
Correct, correct.
as well.
No, absolutely. So I'll tell you like something like my personal hack. I don't know how applicable it is, though I am trying to incorporate that in the organization now more and more. So about 3 years ago, I read this book, Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. It's a Nobel Prize winning author, right? It's a book about behavioral psychology, right? And then very soon after that, I read this book, The Undoing Project by Michael Lewis. So, Michael, this book is actually about Daniel Kahneman and his partner, who together worked on the behavioral psychology framework, right? And for me, I think reading those two books, this happened about 3.5 years ago, because it sort of like brought something to the forefront, right? First was that it was very fortunate for these two guys to meet in with two guys with very complementary skills and ways of looking at things, but working on a problem statement that really nobody else was looking into at that point in time. They worked together for decades, got a Nobel Prize for it, and I was able to read that book over a weekend and learn from it. That's insane. Like how much, like, so two people in very fortuitous circumstances meet, and then you are able to learn from that over a weekend, right? And that sort of like blew my mind in terms of like how powerful something like that is. So I created a framework. I mean, I'll tell you more about that. But I created a framework for myself very early at that point in time, where I every Sunday night before I go to sleep, I ask myself this one question and very simple one, which is, what is this one fundamentally new thing that I learned this week? And the fundamental part is important because not a rehash of something that you already know. It's something that has to be something that I didn't know before, and your neurons have to be firing around for that. And I started doing this 3 years ago, right? And I try to keep it as diversified as possible. It's not just engineering, I read things around product, design, psychology, philosophy, history, culture, analytics, right? Whatever, everything, keeping it super diversified. But keeping in mind that the selection here is important and learning from that book itself. I think learning from original thinkers, not people, the people who conceptualize the ideas becomes important than the practitioners in my way, right?
Yes.
And
Foundational
I think
knowledge.
that's very, very foundational knowledge, right? And I think from my perspective, I think that framework, I never really knew why it was working, but I realized that I was always just doing better by asking myself this one question every week. And the weeks in which I didn't have an answer to this, I would make sure that I restructure the subsequent week to so that I would learn two things, not one thing. And I think more recently, actually, one of the learnings that I was having, one of the books that I was reading, actually comes from this John Bogle's theory of investment, which is basically around index funds. Absolutely right. So index funds basically talk about the way to invest, or the secrets to investing is keeping a diversified portfolio and investing the same amount over and over. And as your earning capability increases, you invest more than you can, but still the same thing over and over on a regular cadence, right? And I realized that the framework that I had somehow stumbled upon was actually very similar to that, except the currency here was time and not money, right? And I think the way I think about it is that by doing this, you see this compound interest kicking in over time, because when you apply these things over time, you are able to invest more, because things that you're learning allow you to create more time, because you're able to do things better. And secondly, the order of magnitude of things that you're doing also increases because of complexity, right?
That's right.
And yeah, but I think one other thing that I feel like is very important here is that learning is one part. Learning is always reinforced upon application. And thankfully, when you're building an organization, you always have a canvas to apply all of these learnings in a very iterative way, where you apply them, learn from them, iterate over and over again, and again are blessed with doing the same thing, running the similar loop, but with increased complexity. And I felt like these two things coming together, constantly making sure that you're learning something fundamentally new. And if I think about it, I have like 50 to 150 new things that I have learned over the last 3 years. That's fundamentally new things. And the compound interest of that is really phenomenal, right? And the other thing at a growing organization, right, is that when you're facing problems that are harder than the ones that you're currently solving for, it is where this Czech philosopher or psychologist actually had written this thing called as flow. So the philosophy of flow kicks in, right? Because you are constantly, by doing this, you're constantly improving and addicted to this insatiable need for learning, right? So I think like it
Right.
applies across this. I think that's one of the things that I've done. Though I think, I mean, if I had to really combine all this together, right, like none of this is possible without remaining humble about your own self-worth and your capabilities, because there's always more to learn. There are always more people to learn from, and there's always more complexity and more challenges to solve. And if that humility goes away, you start learning, you stop learning, and much like the stock market, you start seeing that regression in your portfolio. But sorry, I
Perfect.
went to,
I think,
yeah,
yeah, no, as Socrates put it, the only thing I know is nothing.
yeah.
Right? I mean, that being a constant learner, and I think that's super
Hmm.
important. And you're just connecting what you're saying, that there's different things, and being, having multidimensional knowledge really helps you connect things. And
Hmm.
as you call it, flow, different mental models come together and help you take decisions
Yeah.
and make better decisions at that particular point of time
Hmm.
when you have to take them. Right? So super helpful. And unfortunately, we could go on and on, and I know
Hmm.
that's the challenge. But how as you're building this, I know you talked about strategic knowledge and priorities and tactical priorities, which are there. How do you make sure that you prioritize things as a founder, right? And make sure that everybody is rowing in the same direction in the company, right? I think
Hmm.
that's a pretty phenomenal thing as complexity increases and things change. How do you make sure that everybody's rowing in the same direction in the company? And how do you set your own prioritization framework for what needs to be
Hmm.
achieved? And how do you disseminate those goals within the team? But
Got it.
I've
Okay.
always found that super fascinating about Postman. How with discipline and rigor you've been able to do that.
Hmm. Got it. So I think I break it. So first aspect that I've done is definitely I've been consciously now applying this framework that I told you about. I created this interface
Right.
for other people in the organization so that in their weekly notes that come to me, at least, and right, I make them answer this question: what is this fundamentally new thing that you learned this week? And I think one of the things that has happened over time by constantly showing people the value of doing that, by me sharing my learnings in terms of books or podcasts or conference talks, or experiences which I applied the similar learning, I see people consciously evolving in the way that they take decisions, and you improve the team in a very fundamental way. In fact, by doing this in the teams that I've experimented with this idea, I have seen that I learn actually not one thing. I learn at least 3 things a week because I learn from the team, which teaches me things through a very asynchronous route. Right? But now, actually, to answer your prioritization aspect, right? I think it comes down to A, identifying what is important and taking very, very conscious decisions around that, and B, delegating the rest. And delegating, and actually more importantly, partnering with the person on the other thing that you do, right? Now, this often comes up, and I think, I mean, I can imagine, right? Like for us, what is the most important thing that we have is the Postman product. The Postman product, because there is 8 years of context in an ecosystem or an industry at which A, we are at the forefront of, and B, we have been listening to 11 million people or a growing number of people for the last 8 years in a very conscious, deliberate way. Those are things that you cannot acquire. Those are things that you cannot delegate very easily because you have to be the one who constantly share context, right? So from our
That's right.
perspective, product was something that we could never delegate, at least at this point
That's
in
right.
time, until somebody else comes into the organization and grows along with us, acquires that context and takes better decisions. So the overall picture is something that you cannot delegate. Internally, of course, you delegate by letting people take ownership of aspects that they are looking into, right? Similarly, like the other thing that I mean I briefly discussed earlier is organizationally you cannot delegate because the organizational design part is very, very important to who you are as an organization and who you are as people. But if you go towards the other aspect, which is around the things that you should delegate or the things that you can partner with people, right? I break it down into 2 aspects. A, making sure that a clear interface is created between the person with whom you are partnering and yourself. And
Right.
you agree on the interface. You don't agree on the implementation, you agree on the interface. And then you put certain measurable outcomes on top of these interface.
Very
And
tangible
outcomes
things.
take exactly right. And that outcomes also take 2 types. One which is optimizes for the process optimization. The other one that measures your ambition. And the one that measures your ambition, once you agree on them, and you allow people to earn your trust and then take ownership of those aspects and deliver on that. And by the way, like I mean, so that's the idea. It's as simple as creating the right interface, making sure that you agree on what the interface is, what the outcomes for that interface is, and then you let people choose the implementation. And if you notice, I'm literally borrowing these concepts from APIs.
Right.
Because I think APIs is a philosophy. It's not
That's
just
it.
a wrapper on top of code. It ends up being a philosophy that you can borrow from.
That's right. No, is Ankit, we can go on, and I think that's I in the interest of time, I know we have 10 minutes, and I had a bunch of other questions, but the conversation with you are always so fascinating and so much to learn, and I'm sure the audience has gained a lot as well. I'll cut short my questions and I'll go straight to Gokul. Gokul, I know you have a bunch of questions probably waiting for Ankit. I know we have 10 minutes or 15 minutes. All yours. I had a few more questions, but I'm going to stop asking questions. Sorry.
Awesome. Yeah. So I mean, to start with, I had a question which when you guys were on. So how can open source developers leverage Postman? I think that's something which didn't come out in the conversation.
How can open source developers leverage Postman? So I think, I mean, Postman being agnostic of the ecosystem and the sector, right? Like it is also agnostic of how developers who are working on open source platform versus closed source platforms can absolutely look at, Postman as a tool or a system or a platform that they can use to build and manage their APIs as much as possible. Open source, now that's where the definition of open source becomes interesting, because open source is often attributed to code, whereas APIs are products that you create on top of code. Right. So in a lot of cases, you may have your API interfaces that are anyway public, and you may choose to open source your code, but that doesn't necessarily have a direct correlation. The interesting emergence, though, is the concept of open source APIs, where the definitions of the APIs itself has multiple contributors and have multiple people contributing to a definition. And that's kind of like a story that is evolving. And I would stay tuned on how that thing goes out. There's no definite answer to that just yet.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Ankit. So I have a question from Keshavan. So can you talk about a few missteps or mistakes that you made? Any examples would be better, right? So how did you create a system to quickly get around and move ahead in such cases?
Yeah. So a couple of things, right? I mean, obviously there were mistakes, like lots and lots of mistakes that you learn from. But the point is like, how quickly are you able to learn from them? And I think that is where that constant reflection aspect becomes super important. And doing that at a weekly cadence like we do, and I do personally, and I also encourage everybody who works with me to reflect on the missteps that you are taking. And you do that through reflection that happens weekly, that happens quarterly, that happens annually. Right. And the thing is, the thing about that product thinking that I mentioned earlier, which is about being iterative and being analytical, looking at the things that you are changing, applying analytics to measure success or failure, and then doing that whole process all over again becomes super critical, because you are not doing these big bang releases or these big bang changes in, even organizational structure. It's not just to do with product releases, but even organizationally, the way that you evolve is always incremental, iterative, and things that you can learn from by putting like common sense and analytics on top of, right? So that has been the thing. So missteps personally, right? Like I think one of the things that I should have done probably is to learn to, delegate or partner sooner, right? I think the framework that I mentioned briefly earlier, there's a lot of other aspects to that. But at least in the 1 to 10 stage of the organization, managing that inflection better was definitely important. Losing the focus on yourself is another aspect that founders go through, like, your mental and physical health. If you are not, incapacitated, or a lesser stronger word compared to that, for whatever reason, it only hurts whatever you do, right? Another misstep, another learning that I had from this whole thing was, people over process. I think, with the right people, any process works, and with the wrong people, no process works. And the other, I think one of the more important things is also, that strong relationships in the organization overcome any problems. And I've seen this regularly, every organization problem comes down to a missing or poor relationship that exists. So it's not just about finding the right people, but also consciously nurturing the relationship that exists between these people. And procrastination, I feel, is the worst thing that a founder can do, or any leader can do, right? Because you need to do the hard thing now. And this is something that I started practicing this year, that instead of avoiding the hard parts, you double down on them and make sure that you address the hardest parts as quickly as possible.
Got it. So Ankit, another interesting question from Ishan. So how do you think about legally structuring a global SaaS company out of India? Should it be domiciled in India or Delaware? And what are the pros and cons of either in terms of GTM and long-term exit perspective? I think you both can chime in over there.
Great. I mean, I'll let Sameer take that one if he wants to, because I think there are interesting aspects to that.
Sure.
The ecosystem itself has evolved from where we were in 2014 versus where we are right now. Yeah.
So I'll kind of try and answer that for Ishan. Ishan, you know, I know we've discussed this as well. This, you know, we've both spoken. I know which Ishan this is, but Ishan. So you know, India is a great place to build the technology. So you know, obviously you have to be incorporated here to kind of have payroll and any of those things. The US is obviously in some ways the most forward along market, right? And easy to access market, very open. People give you the time of day, and it's a great market to go and learn from. Language is not an issue. The things are at scale. So US is a great market to kind of build for, right? And we figured that out as well in Postman's journey very early. Right? 2014 we started here, but 2015, 16 we started efforts towards moving to the US. Most of the users were there, and we got all the feedback from that ecosystem. So US is a great place to go sell, take market feedback, because customers are at scale, are at, you know, facing challenges at scale, and you learn the most because they're at the real cutting edge of things, right? And you know where the puck is moving if you're listening to that market. So US generally, you know, our advice is always, and we've done this across 45 companies, is to incorporate a US company. Initially, of course, there are some regulatory aspects around it, but initially you start India parent and the US is a sub. But as the place of effective management and the founders move to the US, and more business starts coming out from the US, the thing reverses where it becomes a US headquartered company, and that becomes a parent, and India becomes a subsidiary, and there's transfer pricing between the two. So you know, that's generally the structure which has worked. There are many nuances around it, and Nishan, we can chat more about it one-on-one as well. But at a high level, that's what you know, really works. And most strategic acquirers, IPO, anything that you want to do in the future, US thing really helps. So being a US incorporated company definitely helps. Right.
Fair enough. So in the interest of time, I'll take one more question. So if you guys have anything else, you can just put it in the chat. So Ankit, this one is for you. How have you seen yourself evolve and develop as a leader, you know, across the Postman journey? I mean, what has been the hardest elements to scale?
Yeah, the first part is, I think, letting go. It's been like the hardest thing, right? Like the delegating part I mentioned, like that's definitely been, you know, because up until early 2018, like I barely made it to my own wedding because I had to finish the code of a system that we were pushing out. Like I had my flight at 9 and until 7 a.m. is when I did the last commit, right? And then I went to get married and I flew to Delhi for that. And that's when I realized on the flight that, okay, something had to give. Like it is not sustainable and you need to delegate better. And I think that's been my biggest learning. But since then, I feel, you know, the combination of consciously learning, you know, not learning for the sake of solving a problem that is in front of you, but for the sake of learning itself has been the biggest change. And I think, you know, the way that as a leader, I think I have evolved is basically from somebody who would take a lot of pain in making sure that things are done the right way to somebody who trusts other people and shows them the value in consciously learning a diversified set of things and trust them to take better decisions that they can own and deliver on. It aligns very closely to where we are as an organization, but I think that's been my evolution as a leader. And I think me not making it to my own wedding almost was actually a very important realization to that end.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ankit. So I guess in interest of time, so we'll close this amazing session, guys. I mean, it was really insightful. Lot of learnings, and I think you guys can definitely go on for, you know, longer time. But yeah, so any part.
I got done with only half of the questions, just so that you know. I got done with only half of the questions.
I think next
time we should questions for.
Next time we should make it really longer for sure. So any parting notes from both of you guys, right? Especially on the future of SaaS, what do you see from the Indian ecosystem and all of that?
I'll let Ankit go first.
Right. Got it. Okay. So I think we have seen like a really interesting evolution of SaaS. You know, SaaS has had a bit of a reckoning in the ecosystem itself, right? And we've seen a lot of great companies come out of India. You see the examples of the way Zoho and Freshworks scale. I mean, great examples for all of us in terms of how to. I mean, I still look up at Zoho and see like how they bring people into the workforce. That's just phenomenal. I wish that was a easy to apply and reinforce skill that you would learn from them. So if I really have to put it right, like what I'm hoping for and looking forward to is seeing more category creating companies coming out of India. I see companies like Hasura, for example, that you mentioned earlier, have a very, very promising future ahead of them. Right? Companies that focus on product and also understand what product-led growth means or product-led companies mean, which solve hard technology problems and create a global impact. And I honestly feel that challenges that end up being in this particular space are mostly mental more than anything else, because the world is a far more porous place at this point in time. And there is inherent respect for products and companies that solve real problems. India, for example, has one of the largest communities in developer communities in the world. Right, and just to close this, right? Like I read this somewhere after, in the last few months, which is, where people are referring to Postman as SaaS 2.0 in India. I don't know what that means specifically, but I do believe from an Indian perspective for us, it was important to prove that great deep technology products could be built out of India and have a global impact, focusing on, great user experience. Right, and it's kind of like athletes breaking records. Like if you see the 10-second barrier or climbing Everest, right? But once you know it's done, you know it's possible. And my hope is that we'll see many such companies coming out of India that break these barriers over and over and over again, right? And the finesse of the products that we ship out, we should not compromise. Like as consumers as well as Indians, we should demand that finesse that comes in the products that we build and consume.
And Samir?
No, I totally agree with Ankit. I couldn't agree more. I think we are scratching the surface. I think it's we're going to be, all of us are standing on the shoulders of giants like Girish and Ankit and Abhinav and Sridhar and the likes. All these companies, they are setting the way and are inspiring the next. And I really feel India will in the next 5 years come up with multiple category trading companies. I think the Postmans, the Hasuras, the Fresh Tests, and the iCertices of the world will show the way. I think I'm very, very bullish about it. I think we have phenomenal talent. I think we are getting a better. The world, as Ankit put it, is. I think we're learning constantly. We have an amazing talent pool here. I think, and it's also getting more and more intertwined with the US and India corridor. So I see a lot of companies, in this corridor getting built out, and I see phenomenal set of opportunities in the next 5-6 years. India will definitely be on the map of that, right, and lead from the front in a couple of categories. And I really, really hope that we do a lot of category creating companies. I think why do anything else, right? Why shouldn't we lead from the front?
I think there's a lot of startup founders and to-be founders in this room. And that was definitely inspirational from both you guys, right? So thanks a lot, Samir. Thanks a lot, Ankit, for making time and for this amazing session, right?
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you so much, Gokul, for having us, and really, really appreciate it, Ankit. Very deep insights. Truly appreciate your time.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. Thanks for saying that to me. It's always a pleasure.
Okay. Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye.
Awesome, guys. So now let's move on to the second half of SaaS Talk Local Bangalore, future of Indian SaaS, right? Now, this part is going to be a panel discussion on talent, scale, growth, especially for building a global SaaS brand out of India. And we have three amazing gentlemen today who are also thought leaders in the Indian SaaS ecosystem. Manish Sharma, who's a country manager at GitHub, Avjeet Vijayvargiya, co-founder and CEO of Nectar. He's also the ex-MD of sales in Capillary Technologies, and Prakhar Jain, who is a director of sales, director of global sales, and the first employee of WhatFix, right? Okay, so I have Prakhar, Manish, and just waiting for Avjeet there. Okay, awesome. All right, well, welcome to the SaaS Talk Local Bangalore session, guys. So, instead of a bookish intro, I was thinking I wanted to pass this on to you guys to introduce yourself. And so two things, let's make the intro a little bit fun as possible, right? And maybe with that, you can tie up maybe the favorite lockdown experience or something that you're really thankful from the past few months, when you've been at home particularly. So something in those lines. So, let's start with Prakhar.
Well, thanks a lot, Gokul. Thanks a lot, SaaS Talk Bangalore, for having me today. Well, introduction-wise, I'll keep it quick. Again, been with WhatFix for about 6 years. Have been responsible for setting up the sales process from scratch. And when I say that, an interesting thing comes to my mind because I was not hired as a sales guy initially. Actually, I was hired as a marketeer. I was 3 months into the role. I was brainwashed into sales. My CEO brainwashed me, telling me that I was a sales guy, and since then I've never looked back. So to sum it up, that's a little bit about me. From a lockdown experience perspective, Gokul, I don't think I have a lot to share in terms of favorites. I just am thankful for something that happened because, when this pandemic started and people were very unclear about how things are going to pan out, I was actually in the US traveling, and I had a meeting in LA with a prospect, all set. We were all very excited, so was the prospect, and we were not taking it that seriously. And that's when the news came one fine morning when Trump decided to ban all the incoming flights from Europe. And that was the first trigger for me that this is serious. Because if US is banning incoming flights from a particular continent, Indian government is going to do something similar as well. I canceled all my plans, rebrushed them, and then ran back to India thanks to Air India. That was the first time I traveled Air India, just in time. And I must say it was 2 days before the Indian government decided to ban all international flights. So that's the only thing I can remember of this pandemic that has, happened well for me.
So you literally took the fastest flight out of US.
Absolutely. That was the option.
Awesome. So Manish, you next.
Hi, folks. Thanks for having me here. It's great to be talking to all of you. I really enjoyed Ankit and Sameer's session. Some great insights on how Ankit has scaled the company. Quick word about myself. I'm the country manager for GitHub. I've had multiple swim lanes, as I call it, worked in large companies like SAP, Adobe, Sun Microsystems, and I've done my fair bit of startups as well, some successful, some unsuccessful as well. An interesting thing would be, I would say I travel at least 200 days a year. I'm always on a flight, always in a different city, always in hotels. It's tiring for sure, but because of the pandemic, I'm quite happy to be grounded at home, getting to know my family better and them getting to know me better as well. So it's a very interesting experience. Let's see how long it lasts though.
Interesting. Awesome. So Abhijit, next, I think.
Yeah, thanks, Gokul. Hi, everybody, and thanks for SaaS Talk for having me here. I think I agree with Manish. It was an amazing session just before. Great insights from Ankit and Sameer. I'm looking forward to chat with Prakhar and Manish and yourself and exchange notes here. For me, let me give a quick background and then I'll talk about a couple of experiences which were very interesting for me during lockdown. So I'm a co-founder and CEO at Nectar.ai. We just started, we are a COVID-born company, as I say it to a lot of people. So we started off in Feb this year. There's a lot of learnings there and interesting how company we're building in the COVID period. Before that, I was at Capillary Technologies. I was leading the Asia Pacific business. I joined them early, just like the way Prakhar has been with Whatfix from early days. I joined Capillary, seen the 100x journey, drawn multiple hats, and just like him, I was thrown into sales. I was actually co-ex into sales as well. So I think a lot of founders are pretty good at putting people or forcing or coaxing people into sales. But I think, yeah, that's the sign of a good founder, to identify talent and use them for their best potential. So yeah, I think Anish did well for me at Capillary. I'm thankful to him to push me into sales, and why I also founded a company improving sales productivity. So yeah, that's about my background. And on the lockdown experience, I used to weigh 86 kgs before the lockdown. That was in March, and now I weigh 68 kgs. So I've reversed the digits, so lost 18 kgs. So that's been amazing. And I've eaten a lot of food. I mean, I've eaten probably more than what I used to eat last year. And I also tried my hand at cooking. I mean, pandemic, I actually picked up that as a hobby, and I ended up cooking paneer tikka to rabdi and a lot of interesting stuff. So yeah, I experimented a lot and it turned out well. So yeah, pandemic has been amazing experience, spending time with family and trying new things and also getting fitter. Yeah.
Abhijit, while everybody is getting fatter and you got fitter, right? I mean, we might have to talk after this call for sure, but
I was about to say that Abhijit, I'm on the journey of 68 to 86. So separate topic, but
awesome.
Yeah, happy to explain more.
Yeah, so let's get down to the business, right? I mean, so for this panel discussion, we have three segments particularly. So talent, scale, and growth, right? And I'll position each of the questions to you guys. Let's cover as many questions as possible. That'll be the best way to go about it, right? So I'll get down to the first one. That's in talent, right? So what's the gap in finding the right talent? People not understanding technology or having the right skill, or people not having the right experience for SaaS. So what is it really? So I'll push it on to Abhijit first.
Yeah, I think SaaS is new as well, and I remember back in 2011 when I joined Capillary, and we were just trying to hire our first few people, and SaaS was quite new. Even when I was going into sales meetings to meet some of the buyers, and we were focused on selling to retailers, and I'll talk to them about it's a cloud-based product. I mean, folks will start looking at the sky, right? So it was that kind of an experience where not many people understood cloud, not many people were familiar with SaaS and how it works out, etc. But yeah, fast forward like 9 years from then to now, I see a lot of understanding there and a lot of talent also available, which was not there before. But still, I would say in terms of a talent which can really hit the ground running from the day of joining, I think there's still a bit of gap to be covered. And I largely believe that at colleges, they should definitely, put the courses which are more relevant for the industry. And let's talk about sales, right? I mean, I can talk a lot more about sales. Nothing is taught around sales in schools, and there's so much of an opportunity in terms of employability. If you look at a sales for SaaS, right? I mean, we spoke about how the future of Indian SaaS is evolving. I think there are like 500 companies, upwards of $1 million in ARR now in Indian SaaS, and it's only going to grow multiples. And the number of sales people they would need in next 5 years, I mean, that's phenomenal. So it's a lot of opportunity for folks to come into SaaS and build career, but there's dearth of talent. So I definitely would like to put a point forward there. There's also a lot of opportunity from the curriculum standpoint at colleges to probably, have a course on, say, sales as a career, right? I mean, or just teach sales. That's why I think the function of sales enablement is also picking up now, and companies have to take it on their hand to enable folks. So my perspective is largely from the sales talent standpoint. I'd love to hear thoughts from Manish and Prakhar as well for other functions as well.
Yeah, so I think Prakhar, particularly for you, right? I've been part of Vortex as well, so I'm also seeing that you've been scaling up the entire sales function, right? And you have a mixed people, let's say a lot of people with a lot of experience, some youngsters who are really skillful, right? What do you prioritize when you hire the creme de la creme part of your sales team?
Well, I think a lot depends on what level of role that is. So for an entry level role, you don't hire so much for skill, you hire for the will. So as they say, it's you hire for will and coach for skills, right? So skills can be acquired with time. But when you actually grow into a mid-level or a senior level role, I think the right balance is necessary because, like Abhijit mentioned, the understanding of SaaS is also equally important because it's a different world. How services industries has been operating for the last 20 years and how SaaS operates is different. There the contracts are done in a very different manner. The products are perpetual licenses. And, this is a subscription model. So as soon as something goes wrong, the customer is the king, where they have the option of opting out. So when you're looking at the alignment of the skills of a person, there has to be some weightage given to that as well in terms of the experience. And then, of course, skills is something that can always be coached around.
Perfect. And coming to Manish, right? Manish, just adding on to what both these guys said, for these, let's say when you get the right kind of talent, I mean, there could be executioners, there could be managers, right? Now, how do you actually ensure that, you groom people in both those categories?
Yeah, so before I jump on the execution part and the manager part, I agree with what Prakhar and Abhijit were talking about. It's a maturity of the ecosystem, and it's not only about SaaS. I can rewind back to 98 when I did my first startup, which was a product-based startup, and it was sort of sacrilegious to do a B2B product company. And if you look at the last 25 years, you've had companies like Newgen, Nuclearsoft, Tally that have been around for a very long time, but they've come from the traditional way, right? And India has predominantly been a services industry, as Prakhar said. Now, when you think about SaaS, there are different divisions within the SaaS company. It's a product company in itself. SaaS is a model that enables you to go to market. So simple things like, if you're a SaaS company, how do I do pricing? So when you go out and look for talent, there isn't talent available who worked on operations in devising a product pricing strategy, right? And then how do you do renewals? How do you build infrastructure to do pricing and renewals for your product? So there are these divisions within a SaaS company that needs to be looked at. And when you start looking at talent, it becomes difficult to find people for these different roles. The other issue which I feel comes out from the function that you're in. So Abhijit talked about retail, right? So finding people who will be able to understand the retail industry, whether it's from a sales perspective, marketing perspective, or even development, becomes difficult. And as SaaS categories are sort of evolving, there are different functional areas that are going to become. Talked about products which are specifically targeted towards developer. So do you have people who can converse with developers to sell a SaaS product? So now coming to the execution and manager part, I think it's the scale question. Early on, the 0 to 1 side, you definitely need executioners, right? Somebody who can roll up their sleeve, be sort of like a jack of all trades and do everything. What Prakhar and Abhijit talked about, they were doing other stuff and they were pushed into sales, right? So it's more of an execution focus that you come in. But as you scale, you definitely need, the management view, get manager in place who can put together a strategy, execute, and then you start slicing the piece of the pie as well. So just for marketing, you will need years to run on top of it. So I think it's a question of scale, where you are in the journey, that you decide on, what kind of people that you hire. Back to you, Gokul.
Okay, so do you agree with the same kind of idea that Manish put ahead, or Prakhar, Abhijit?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's bang on, because it all depends on where you are in the journey. Like Manish rightly said, initially you do need executioners because you want to get the momentum going, and then you decide after a while that do you want these executioners themselves to grow into managerial roles and then replicate the success they've been showing for the company, or bring managers from outside. But it's again fully in sync with everything that Manish said. I don't have anything else to add here.
Got it. Abhijit? Okay, I can read.
Yeah, sorry, I had network issues in between.
Yeah, so anything to chime in from what Manish actually mentioned?
No, I think the context is the key here, especially depending on when you are hiring and for what context.
I guess
I totally agree with that context, and there's no set playbook. I mean, every organization needs to figure that out for themselves. What's their priority at that time? A lot of the I've seen organizations end up hiring ahead of time. So they would hire like a very experienced person from a bigger brand much ahead of the curve when you don't need it. Like, so you don't need a VP of sales from a Dell or an Oracle when you're just finding your product market fit, right? You need somebody who can like hustle, roll up the sleeves, and be able to like apply yourself. So I mean, like that, you need to figure out the context. So I totally agree with what Manish said. It's important to figure out the stage before you end up hiring. So whether you go for an execution or for a manager who can build executioners. Yeah.
Got it. So then what about it when we flip this way? I mean, flip the entire thing, right? So we have the right kind of talent in your organization, right? And you have the best kind of managers, executioners, but you need to make sure that they stay with you. You need to retain them, right? So definitely that's a continuous process, arduous process. So how do you guys generally deal with that? So I think I'll go with Prakhar first.
Yeah, very interesting and very broad topic as well, very close to me, Gokul. I mean, there could be a proper 45 minutes to an hour session just on this. See, high level, I'll tell you, typically good talent stays with you when there are two things that I feel are very important to any individual. And then there are, sub important things that depend from one individual to another. Those would be, one is the quality of work, and second is basically what is the relationship equity with your manager and your colleagues. Okay, these according to me play a key role on why you stick to an organization. Now, if you have identified the motivation of a person and the quality of work is good, see, again, retaining top talent also can be divided into different phases of the company. If you look at the initial days, a team of 20 people in a startup is basically doing an equivalent of a 100 people company in a larger larger company at scale. That's how the startups operate. So all those 20 people have to be passionate about something, and their focus is pretty much tied up to the vision of the company. So retaining them is very different from retaining a person when you are mid-sized. It's a 400 employee company, and then things have become slightly different. But these two skills that I mentioned, the quality of work as well as what's the relationship equity, according to me, plays a key role. If people are passionate about what they're doing, they are getting chances to grow. The manager understands the career path, etc. I think it's easier to retain them. I also feel that money used to be a motivation earlier. I think every company is now well funded and is able to attract decent talent. So I don't think that is a big motivation anymore for talent to actually just shift around for a little bit of money here and there. But those two, according to me, are the bigger ones at a high level. Again, I'd love to hear what Abhijit and Manish think as well.
Yeah.
No, I agree with what Prakhar was saying. Just to build on top of it, I think culture plays a very important role of what's the culture within the company. And I think this problem is not just for SaaS companies or startups. It's the same for large companies as well. How do you retain talent is always, top of mind. And culture is what defines it. So the culture of learning, culture of being, honest and open within the employee network, I think it's a very important thing. But most important also is the learning and career opportunities, as Prakhar talked about. Obviously, when you're working in a startup, it's great because you get to learn a lot of things. You get to don many hats, and as the company grows, the opportunity also keeps on growing. So having that, what Ankit talked about, getting the delegated opportunities, setting up an org structure to take up more responsibility as the company grows, definitely helps retain a lot of top talent. Abhijit, would love your views as well.
Yeah, I think Bang was definitely culture, providing the right environment and the goal. Apart, how do you the people, because go through we don't have like a great day every day. There are lead the team during those times, how they support you, and it's very important, and it deeply comes from the culture and treat your goes long very closely. You know what they're up to on the personal side as well, because at startups you get to know people very closely, and that comes around way. So it's very important that you motivate. That really works. Second thing I've noticed, enabling and empowering. So if you're able to invest in people and be able to give them opportunity, direction, show them the goal they need to hit, and empower them, they will figure it. I mean, and good folks will always figure it out if enabled in the right way. And that enablement also takes you to a direction where you can develop future leaders. So a lot of leaders we saw at Capillary in the last 8-9 years I'd worked there, just tried different things and were like, most of them joined fresh out of college or like with a couple of years experience, but they then became department heads and they were managing multi-million-dollar businesses. But it all happened because we invested in people, enabled and supported them, and gave them the opportunity and freedom to try new things. In between, but you need to support them and motivate them. So that goes a long way. Yeah.
Got it. Makes sense, Abhijit. So, that comes to the question, what is happening right now? I mean, the new normal, right? Everybody is working from home. How do you guys actually make sure that this is maintained? Right. I mean, I'll jump over to the scale section right after this, but yeah, this is something definitely everybody would want to know. So, Manish first.
Yeah, I'll go ahead. So I won't say that I have all the answers to this one because this is a very unique situation. Um, if I look at GitHub, we were always a remote company. So we were well prepared for this because people are remote. I think policies, systems, processes, everything was set up in place to deal with the remote culture. It's definitely difficult. Everybody is, I think, doing too many calls, too many things. It's important to step back. For example, if we have no meeting Tuesdays, which we extend to Wednesdays as well. We always catch up, all of us, on a Friday afternoon just to talk about life, nothing to do with work, and go easy on emails and Slack as well. So I don't think I have a golden answer for you on this one, Gokul. I think we're still dealing with it. But being there is quite important. And I'll just build on what Abhijit was talking about. Startups, definitely there are ups and downs, especially for a founder. I'm sure there will be many founders on the call. I'm sure if some of you have co-founders who are sort of emotionally vested and can, help each other get through this. But if not, having a group of friends or a board of advisors, a virtual board of advisors that you can connect with every week just to talk your head out on what's going on and take advice, that definitely helps. Love to hear your views.
How is it different for you both?
Yeah, I think very similar, and there's no defined playbook, so to say, because it's still evolving. We don't know how long this is here to stay, etc. But the initial first month was very tough, where nobody knew what's happening, and people were getting all cranky. And salespeople are, especially like I manage a global sales team in different locations, and salespeople in general are extroverts. They derive energy by talking to people, being in offices, and they're chatty. And when that doesn't happen, you're at home just trying to focus on your work and meetings. Yes, it does tend to get on your head a little bit. But I think how we did it is we were fortunate that with a remote inside sales model that we've always been preaching, at least the base was all set up in terms of tools and technologies to facilitate collaboration. So we literally honed in on that and really upped our game in terms of how we wanted to do. Like, one of the key things we started doing was a virtual chai break every day, which would be just about, a 30 to 40 minutes chit chat about everything apart from work. So people would tell their pandemic experiences, how things are, the cases are increasing, this is happening. So you could vent out anything that you wanted to. And slowly people actually started realizing that the need for this is reducing now, because we are now trying to adjust to the new normal. In meetings, we would have some open hours where, my calendar would be free, some of my manager calendars would be free, which would be an AMA. Anybody could just set up time to talk to us about any topic or anything that was going on with them on the personal front or on the work front. And we would discuss some of that. So I think some of these things definitely helped stay sane in these tough times. And I think that's what worked for us.
Got it.
Over to you.
I think for you it'll be completely different, right? Because you guys started off when this pandemic kicked in, right? So culture itself is based on that, right?
Yeah, and I think as we are COVID-born company, so we were born with that whole environment around us, and we had to be prepared from day one. But more than that, going to the point which Manish was mentioning, like GitHub and GitLab and Atlassian. So I've been very inspired by those companies and the culture and the kind of formidable business they have built working with a remote first culture. And that's something I was very influenced by. And just like Prakhar has an international team and he manages multiple people sitting in one location, I also had a distributed sales team in past where I'd managed people from 18 different countries. And so I always had this whole appreciation for having a remote culture and be able to work. The only challenge has been that we are grounded and being at one place. So remote is fine that you can work remotely and with a distributed spread out team, but I think working at one place becomes more challenging. For us, we then came up with a few ideas, so which became a part of the culture. So we have a gaming Friday where we all come together and we play a game, right? So we play different from games like Age of Empires to we've got a lot of developers, right? So they really love playing AOE to Counter-Strike, to the different games that they end up playing on the Friday. Or Once a month, we have a tea talk where we come and share ideas. Like we are building products around sales, so we talk about that and how the world is evolving. So everybody in the company knows about like what we are up to. And sometimes we have like a monthly coffee chat where we just chit chat, get to know each other, play some kind of a funny game, ask like trick questions to each other, and just get to know each other better and keep it a bit lighter. So initiatives like these have been like quite helpful. And we also strongly encourage less emails. Slack also, we just encourage them that don't ping on like all channels or like to everyone in public, or don't do at here more often. I mean, just try to like use it minimalistically so that we use technology as an enabler and not get fully dependent and consumed in it, right? So I think some of that has helped. And being like a
Awesome.
younger
So
company, when we
gaming
are setting it
Fridays,
up,
then no
I
meeting
think it just becomes a
Tuesdays,
part of
and
the
the
culture,
chai
so
pe
it's
charcha
quite
and all
easier
of
to
this is
settle
like
in.
the common thing, right? So for all the attendees, if you have any other crazy ideas, just drop it on the chat. Everyone would love to know, right?
There is one more which I'll just add, Gokul. Working from home, the other aspect is your family is
Yeah.
also involved, right? So if when I'm staying in an apartment, right, my kids are moving around and stuff like that. So we've also started doing every fortnight, just inviting a musician or a DJ from outside and just doing a party. And we just leave the laptop on, the guys playing, the family sitting, listening. So it becomes an interesting, participative atmosphere as well. So that's a wacky thing that we started doing.
Awesome.
Actually, Google, just to sort of add on that, two experiences really quickly. When the pandemic started, one person in my team actually ended up calling a prospect on a Sunday because he honestly did not realize it was one. And because there were no weekends and no right balances. And the funny part, the prospect laughed on it and actually had a conversation for 20 minutes. He actually understood that fact as well, that how pandemic is getting on people's head. It was really interesting. In second scenario, just like how we are talking, one of the prospects' pet dog came and actually stood on the study table or something, wherever they were talking. And the prospect was really cold earlier, but when that happened, she started opening up, and that turned into a wonderful conversation. Maybe story for other dates, but I just wanted to share on how things have been so different in the new.
Awesome. Okay, so I mean that was really awesome, guys. So I'll just move on to the second segment, just in interest of time, and I'm just keeping one question, which is broad, right? Now, all three of you have scaled into different geographies, right? So Prakhar, you have experience scaling into US, UK. Abhijit, you have experience scaling into the Southeast Asia, ANZ markets. Manish, you are trying to scale GitHub in India, right? I mean, definitely you guys have experience in the other geographies, but this is the current scenario, right? Now, what are the nuances for each of these regions, or how the buyer behavior changes? So any of those kind of wisdom that you can drop in, right? So I'll start with Abhijit.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question, and I just feel that there's a lot of money on the table founders leave if they don't approach Southeast Asia. Especially if you are selling into India and you got a product market fit there. It's quite easy to sell in Southeast Asia. It's not as difficult as what it turns out to be in US, because US you need to be doing a lot many different things, and I think Prakhar will also speak about it. But in Southeast Asia, culturally it's quite similar. Think of Southeast Asia. I mean, you have in ASEAN you have 11 countries. Then ANZ is extended. Australia and New Zealand also. There's a decent business out there to be done. English-speaking countries again. And then there's China is tough, so I would not address China, and I would not advise as well to go and attempt China. I would say between China and US, one should attempt US being a SaaS company. But yeah, largely Southeast Asia perspective, if I have to talk about, is money on the table. Culturally very similar. The buyer behavior is similar. Plus, there is lesser competition. I mean, in India alone, if you're selling into the market, there's a lot more competition. US, when you're going, there's like hyper competitive. Southeast Asia, on the other end, is somewhere in between. It's not as competitive, and the bang for buck is a lot more. So what you sell in India for $1, you'll probably get 1.5 to $2 in Southeast Asia on an aggregate level, and sales cycles are quite similar. The population is also like in a similar context. You would say younger economy, demographics are quite similar, and they are like quite friendly as well to Indian software companies and professionals selling here. So I very strongly advise, and I do advise a lot of startups in my free time, and I strongly encourage them to like come and attempt Southeast Asia if you've seen product market fit in India. If you're a company which from day one is US focused and US has been like your core market, then don't waste time in India or Southeast Asia. Because just to build a product for US is a whole different ball game, and it's very difficult to change gears. So if you're US focused from day one, then just go after US all out. But if you have a product market fit in
Got it.
India and
So
you're
then
selling
what
into
about
India,
ANZ
then
as well?
Southeast Asia just
Sabjit,
needs
that's
a
also
lot of money behind
a
it.
region where you are trying to expand, right?
Yeah, so we spend time there as well, and it's a quite decent market to sell. It's not as competitive as US, and it's quite responsive to digital and remote selling. Unlike India and Southeast Asia, which probably will open up to remote selling as well. But in India and Southeast Asia, traditionally you like to spend more face time. But Australia and New Zealand, on the other hand, you can actually sell remotely. So we used to sell a lot of deals in Australia and New Zealand by having somebody in Malaysia or India who was pitching and selling there. And again, a good market there. Price points are good. In Australia, their sales cycles a bit longer compared to Southeast Asia, where decision making is a bit faster, but still a good market to try. And I would just advise this with a pinch of salt, because what's important to understand is the sector you are selling into. Like if I had to give an example of my previous employer, Capillary, we were selling to retailers. And when we looked at retail in general as a space globally, retail was dying in US. Thanks to Amazon, they were killing retailers. And if you look at Southeast Asia and India and Asian markets, retail was emerging. And this is 2010, 2015 period. And it made a lot of sense to sell into emerging markets because we are a vertical focused company, and our vertical was very strong in Asia. So I would also
Got
add
it.
that aspect.
So comparatively, Manish, so
apart
how
from
different is it
the
for
other things I
India
said,
then? I mean,
to
how does
consider
the buyer
market focus.
behavior change? What are the different differences, particularly the starkly difference that you see?
I think, and many of you on the call will agree, India market is a bear with claws. It's apart from being competitive, it's a culturally very different market. Number one, customers always crib on price. So they always ask for discounts. Pricing is always a challenge. It doesn't matter whether you're a startup or a large MNC. You always get pulled into price conversations very early in the cycle, even before you can establish the value for the customer. So that's one thing. The second thing which I've seen in the India market is the buyer is not as professional as you would expect them to be. The US definitely is more professional, where they're more forthright in their feedback, whether they want to continue the conversation, whether they're really interested or whether they have a budget or not. But in India, the conversations will drag for a long time. They will show that they're interested, but it might only end up being an academic exercise. So this happens a lot. The third thing that I've very often seen is Indian customers straight away jump into a POC conversation. Show me how to do it. Whereas in the other markets, having a reference call or a reference case study is sort of good enough for them to understand the value of the product, or even just look at the online trial kind of stuff. But Indian customers force you into a POC and take you down a services conversation. And okay, how can you extend this for me in this way, etc. I think this is a cultural thing. The buying behavior hasn't changed for a very long time. I've seen this, I would say, over the last 2 decades. It's predominantly been the same. The other view is also the size of the market. So depending on what function you're addressing from a SaaS perspective or category that you're addressing, getting to know what is the size of the market in India is very, very important. Because if you just take a slice of how many billion-dollar companies are in India, forget about the valuation-led startup, but just billion-dollar revenue companies, there aren't too many. It's predominantly a mid-market or SMB-led country. So if that's the model, then how do you reach customers? How do you engage? How much budget they have? Becomes a very interesting view. And the SMB point becomes more sort of the clause that I talked about, because they are promoter-led, and usually the functions are all dependent on the promoter to take the decision. And their understanding and grasp of how technology can help is not usually very forward-looking. So it definitely is a challenging market. But again, there are some green sprouts, as I would say. with the whole digitization being forced on everybody over the last 6-7 months. I think customers are now, at least the enterprise customers are now starting to look at what can I do, what can I adapt that I was not looking at before, and start taking these experiments forward. So that's my view of the India market. It's not all doom and gloom as I called it. There's definitely an opportunity because it's a good test bed as well. Every SaaS company, we all have aspirations of going global, selling in the US and every country. I think being closer home, getting pilot customers who are closer home, who can help you sort of, triangulate use cases, give you feedback. I think that definitely helps in the India market.
Awesome. Yeah. I want to bring an angle here particularly because it's about future of SaaS and the different geographies. How do we target and how do we actually, scale the company's presence there, right? And that coming to that US, right? Most of the SaaS companies in India wants to have a presence there now. How did you actually envision that, or how did you actually tap onto the market, and especially on enterprises on that way? And from what I know, most of it is setting out of India, right? So how did that happen, Prakhar?
Yeah, sure. So, actually before that, just taking a step back on everything that Manish and Abhijit said, very relatable to us as well, as we are a global company as well. See, India and APAC, what in our understanding has been, like you guys validated as well, it's more a relationship-based economy, and India is pretty much a do-it-for-me economy. Like, you do everything for me. In the end, if I like the price, I'll buy it, or I'll probably bring you 90% down and think about it. US, on the other hand, is very, very different. It's a much mature market. It's highly competitive. If your product is robust enough, the culture is of being very direct. They are never beating around the bush, as you will actually find in a lot of other economies. So your sales cycles are comparatively shorter. Your buyers are smarter. It's a high risk-seeking economy. So your sales cycles, another reason your sales cycles are short, that they don't mind spending a lot. If you actually see the B2C market in US, it's the most impulsive market in general in terms of the buyer behavior and how they make purchases. And the same thing is actually applicable to B2B as well. So when from a sales perspective, I think that is one of the reasons that we have understood the culture well. Our product has been robust enough to crack the market. It's a lot also depends on what category you are selling to and who are your buyers in general. So like I was hearing the Postman story, which was, so different from other B2B companies where it's all about, it's a product-led growth model, and they've chosen the perfect model because their target persona is developers. You can't sell to developers. It's not that easy in an enterprise sale. Then they don't like being sold to. That's how the personality or the psychology of the developers is. So PLG model works there. But from a market perspective, if you actually do a cultural dimension study, which is by Keith Hofstede, the 5 cultural principles. So if you look at the power distance, long-term orientation, uncertainty avoidance, etc. So all of these principles together, it gives you a sense of that it's a high risk seeking economy. And you can sell if you have got the basics right. So if you are able to show the value, the feature-based sale never works in US. It's all about, okay, this is my problem. This is how I'm going to be solving it for you. Like when we started selling to startups, and we were mainly talking to the C-level executives, mostly the CEOs, CTOs, etc. I was very simple. I remember we've closed $20,000, $30,000 deals just after one demo. That's it. Just one demo of 60 minutes. Yeah, give the product to me. I'm going to play around it for an hour and sale done. That's it. I can't imagine that happening in an Indian setup. It's just so different because there it's about my time is more important and I'm ready to pay you more money to save more money. And that's what's important to them. If you're actually talking to the senior leadership, it's all about saving more time for them. So I think in US, the buyers are very mature. It's a technology-driven market where some of the other markets are actually getting there, but there is still time. So it's far more advanced that way from a buyer behavior standpoint that makes it easier. But again, it's always easy when you have done it, and some of the other markets are much harder. So it's a little bit of bias coming from that as well. But what I personally feel like we try to sell to Europe as well. So overall, if you look at our company split, we have 65% revenues coming in from US, 15-20% coming in from Europe, and the rest is rest of the world. So if you look at from that perspective, our stats of US is much better compared to others, because other markets are still catching up. And in our experience, it has always been that US is at the forefront. Europe catches in about 8 to 10 months later. And then another year is when APAC and India actually comes in. So that's been a typical trend. But that's what also makes India a hotbed for, a lot of SaaS products that can be built out of India and to be sold in these geographies. So I'll pause there and see, Gokul, if you have any follow-up questions to that, or if you have any audience questions here.
Yeah, thanks, Prakhar. I think, I'll just move on to the last bit also. Then we'll go to the audience questions. But I'm sure many of the folks and the attendees have questions. And these guys are experts in each of these regions. So definitely reach out to them post this event so that you get more insights, deeper insights, I would say. Right. So thanks for that, guys. I mean, definitely puts a good perspective for across the geographies. And to the last part, I wanted to go into the growth side of it, right? Now, growth models is something that you keep hearing from everywhere. I mean, there's so many different models. There are so many different channels to tap onto, right? Now, as a company, first thing is like, what all models do you prioritize, right? To grow particularly right now, it's more like, you just want to grow continuously on a regular pace. Now, how do you prioritize on models? What kind of channels do you focus on to start with, right? So I think I'll push on to Abhijit.
Yeah, Gokul. I think that's a very important question. And this question comes in around the time when you're building your first product, when you're in the garage hustle phase, you're doing like trying to reach your product market fit. That's when you start thinking that you would have thought about your ideal customer profile when you're building a product as well, but it's still not finally casted. And then you would have some kind of a understanding that, okay, these are my potential industries, sectors, personas I can potentially sell to. And then you enter into go-to-market experiments. And those experiments would typically happen post product market fit to, like, say, $1 million in ARR, and from $1 million to a $10 million in ARR, where you have to repeat those. And it's very important to choose those experiments wisely and commit to those, and see what works. And if you land something that works for you, then you have to double down. I mean, there's no other way to scale faster but doubling down on what's working. So to give an example, when we started off at my previous company, we were focused on selling loyalty software. And now loyalty software is a very broad thing. You can sell to multiple companies and multiple ways, right? I mean, you can sell to the marketing head, you can sell to the IT head, you can sell to the CEO of the company. Then you can also sell to, like, retail as an industry, which got a lot of frequency of visits of customers, to, like, you can sell to an airline or a travel or a hospitality, where you also see that behavior. But then we narrowed down on a vertical, because we just felt that as a vertical, there's a lot of disruption to be done. And we were building our technology platform on mobile feature phones at the time, 2009, 2010. Smartphones were not as prominent. So feature phones, and we disrupted the industry by introducing mobile number as a loyalty number, so that everybody remembers their number. You don't have to carry multiple cards, and that itself was a big disruption. And we felt that the biggest value we could add to was in retail sector. So we just chose that. While we did experiments in some of the other sectors, but we quickly called those off. So to some, and we then double down on retail, and then Capri became like a retail focused vertical company, and grow to like a much more formidable revenue over the last 8-9 years. So the key takeaway there would be, and the learning that I have for my new venture as well when I'm doing, is have some experiments in mind while you're building the product, and you'll experiment those with a few industries, few clients. As soon as you see some success, a product market fit, and is repeatable, just double down on that. And it could be a sector, it could be a market, and do more of that from a 1 to 10 million band. And on the channel perspective, it could be that you're selling through your remote sales team, or you're selling through a direct sales team on ground, or it could be channel partners who are working out, or it could be like if your product is focused on product-led growth and it's a bottoms-up product, the way Ankit described what Postman did, then that needs to be taken into account. Or if a product needs to be sold to the CEO. So again, it's very contextual. It's contextual to the product, contextual to the stage.
Thanks, Abhijit. So,
and
just keeping that thing, I mean, it's very contextual to the product right now. In that case, Manish, how do you associate revenue streams as well to the entire growth? Right now, GitHub is a much more mature company in that way. So you have seen from your previous experiences also, right? So how do you relate the revenue streams with the entire growth?
Yeah, it's as I'll just build on what Abhijit was saying. It's very contextual. Self-serve is the utopian view for everybody. I think the growth is defined by product in all segments. It doesn't matter whether it's the inside sales model, self-serve model, inbound marketing channel. It doesn't matter. I think product is what will help the company and the channel win. I've seen many a times people rushing towards looking at a channel-led growth or an experiment on the channel. I think fundamentally the most important thing to realize is if you're looking at a channel partner, they are mostly fulfillment partners. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. They will be hearing what customers are asking for, and they will be fulfilling that need. So if a customer is asking for, let's say, a loyalty management solution, and if they're a partner of Capillary, they will be able to fulfill that demand. Similarly, if they want on, let's say, an ERP solution or an analytics solution or a developer trading solution, so they fulfill that demand. Many startups actually think that a partner can help them take it to market. So in a market making model, it'll never work. So I think the stage of where the product is very important. So that's one statement I wanted to make on the growth side. Second is I've always been a very strong believer of the inbound marketing channel. In one of the startups that we did, 100% of our revenue came from the inbound marketing. And when we reached that point where we were thinking about, okay, what next? We're saturating on the inbound leads, what next? That's when we started experimenting with outbound marketing. We started experimenting with field sales. So I think on that 0 to 1 or 0 to 10 stage, figuring out that first channel that will help you scale is very important, doubling down on it before starting other experiments as well. So get this one perfect, the first model. It could be inbound, it could be self-serve, it could, whatever it is, get that going first and then start experimenting. And just on the partnership part that Abhijit talked about, there are lots of models. I've spoken to many startups over the last, I would say, 1 or 2 months, and they've taken very different partnership approaches as well. So for example, OEM, again, it's a contextual channel. Depending on what kind of a SaaS company and offering that you have, figuring out global partners who can OEM your solution when they're going to market in their product. So that can be one revenue stream as well. But it's important to experiment, as Abhijit was talking about.
Got it. So in the interest of time, I'll just cut down to one more question and then open it to Q&A. Prakhar, is that all right? Is there something else that you wanted to add there?
No, it's okay. Go ahead with your question.
All right. So I think one of the questions that most of the SaaS founders and functional heads have, right? What is the good org structure for a company, right? Who to hire first, and especially when you're hiring the functional heads, right? What is the priority going the SaaS company in that way, right? So Prakhar, I'll go to you first.
Sure. So I think it's this question is slightly related to one of the earlier ones that we discussed, which is about executioners and managers. And it depends on the scale of the company. At what stage are you looking to hire these people? Like typically in the 0 to 1 journey, you wouldn't be needing a lot of managers or senior level people. If you're looking at hiring VPs, that comes mainly in the 1 to 10 journey, is when, because you want to structure the organization. Because see, initially when you join a startup, it's all holacratic, right? I mean, one person is doing 20 different things, but that generalization slowly gets converted to specialization when you want to go deeper into processes and want to achieve scale. So that's when you look to hire VPs. Now, our experience has been is rather than, there are 2 types of VPs for any function. One could be your dashboard VPs at the back end, and second could be your hands-on VPs. So for startups, what our experience has been and what has worked better for us is hands-on VPs, because, if a customer is churning and if you have a VP who can only tell you reports and just tell you that, okay, the customer is going to go, that's not enough for a startup. I mean, the VP should be hands-on in being able to jump on to a customer call and save that customer. Same is with a sales call as well. When something is going wrong, can that VP jump on and save? So it's one thing to give directions and design the structure, etc., and another thing to be in the mix and have skin in the game. So it slowly evolves when the company scale. But in the initial 1 to 10 journey, if you're hiring your first VP as a functional head, according to me, they should be more hands-on. I think that's how the playbook evolves as well, in terms of the triggers you get from your business on when you want to go more granular into a particular specialized role from there and so on.
Got it. So Abhijit, I think that whole dynamics changes when it's looking into Southeast Asia or EMEA or ANZ, right? So how does that work out?
While the geography creates some kind of a difference, but I would still say that the fundamental pillars of hiring a talent is similar that way, because and as my Prakhar said, I'm a strong believer of that you need somebody who can hustle as well. If you're hiring like a senior hire at an early stage of a startup, right? So and especially the VPs come in at 1 to 10 million, don't hire before that and don't hire after that. You should hire, but I think if you're not hired a single VP before 10 million, then I think first of all, it's not possible to even reach 10 million. It's very, very difficult. You need to have your VPs in place because they start building the team and taking to the next level. But the 1 to 10 million is a sweet spot, and it would work same for every geography. I can probably add a point there that what could be the sequence of hiring, right? So I would say a first VP should be a VP of marketing for most SaaS companies, because content marketing is a great strategy. Inbound, if you need to start generating, it needs to start much earlier. You need to invest in creating great content, SEO, SEM. You need to start working towards some sort of a brand. So the VP of marketing is a very key role. I would say if I have to pick the first VP functionally, it would be VP marketing, somewhere around $1 million ARR, or probably even earlier, like say $500,000 ARR that you should get. Then I would strongly suggest if you're not hired a salesperson yet, because most of the SaaS startups have like strong product and engineering founders. So they might hire like a VP sales and prefer to hire VP sales earlier. So that would be the second. Third would be VP customer success. And it's one of the least talked about roles, and it's the most important role, one of the most important roles for SaaS companies, because a lot of your revenue comes in from subscriptions. And it's important that your clients see value on what you're delivering. So I would say VP customer success becomes important. And then I would say product and engineering would come later. And a very strong VP engineering you'll need like probably towards a 10 million ARR, because then your problems become different scale. And plus founders have many other things to solve. And the 10 to 50 million problems are different, and you would want like your core product or some aspects of it to be on.
Got it. Manish, any advice?
I would probably sequence it out functionally.
Nothing else to add. I think Prakhar and Abhijit have covered it beautifully.
Perfect. So I'll just quickly move into the Q&A. I think we are a bit late, but I'll just take a couple of questions. So one is, let's say SaaS products require deep sector understanding. So by virtue of this, is it necessary to have a founding team with a SME? If not, how can one go about identifying problems? So I'll go to Abhijit itself.
Yeah, I think it's always helpful if you have a subject matter expert in the team, because you tend to not reinvent the wheel, and you have a lot of domain understanding that plays out, and somebody can play the role of the user or the buyer much earlier into the product thinking and product strategy. That's always helpful. So I mean, if you're like at such an early stage, you're thinking through an idea and putting a founding team together, it's definitely a big plus if one of them has a deep subject matter expertise when you're building the product. So I would strongly advise. And if that is not the case, I would then suggest that quickly surround yourselves with SMEs who basically have some knowledge, so as advisors or angel investors, and keep a constant dialogue with them as you're thinking through the product. So it becomes very important, because what you should not be doing is create something where you have no clue about, you don't have an experience or background, and then you go and launch it. Then you will definitely have challenges with respect to adoption, with respect to understanding the use cases and journeys.
So I'll take one more last question before we wind up, right? So I think this we touched base on earlier, the whole remote working setup. So what should you prioritize while attracting and retaining talent in this particular setup, right? I mean, it's definitely different from how we used to have it normally, right? So what should you prioritize in such a setup? So I'll ask this to Manish.
Sorry, Go, can you repeat that question? I didn't get it. I was breaking up.
Yeah, so particularly setup in this new normal, how do you prioritize attracting and retaining talent? Because it's much more comparatively much more easier on a physical setup in that way, right? No perks, no bill, no lunches and dinners and all of that. How does that work?
So a couple of things. What we do, even before the pandemic, is our interview process deeper into the knowledge or anything. It's more about the cultural fit. So getting that individual to talk to at least 10 to 15 people, a lot of people, but it helps because the way we're interacting with that individual, the culture will come out. So the individual will also get comfortable with, okay, what is the company that I'm going to be looking to join and how are they thinking about things? So that definitely is the first step. Second is the whole process of interviewing, and I can talk with luxury because we've been doing this for a very long time. The process of interviewing is remote. So the whole scale process, the follow-up process, the communication, the offer letter, all of that is also remote. So how can you make that very easy, very simple, and very, I would say, for the person to experience the culture? So that becomes for one part. And after that, when the individual is joining, how do you make it very simple for a remote person to join? Because there will be a courier person who will drop off the laptop and then you will be on Zoom calls or Teams call. How do you relate? So I think putting together the 30, 60, 90-day plan, and it's not only about the functional knowledge, right? It's about knowing the company, talking to different teams, different people, and having that regular connect for the first 30, 60, 90 days is very important, because that's the time when, the thought process about who I am in the company, who do I work with, what's my team, what's the company goal, it becomes clearer. In the physical world, it was always easy, walking into an office, seeing posters, talking over lunch and coffee, you get to know a lot more. But in the virtual world, it's difficult. So thinking through this entire step is extremely, extremely important.
Thanks, Manish. And Prakhar, so even Whatfix has been hiring crazily during the pandemic. I think around 70, 80 people already, right? Now, how have you been actually managing that part? And particularly your team has been scaling up pretty rapidly there.
Yeah, I think very similar to what Manish described. It has been very similar for us as well. We've been doing a few cross-border hiring as well. We've been hiring in London and Germany too. So that's been a little bit of a higher priority and challenge, I would say, compared to the team in India. Reason being, because they are one of the earlier hires. Our teams are not that big in that culture. So there, when you are actually hiring and onboarding people, is slightly different from how we do locally with the India team, because now the team is big enough, the playbook is very well defined. There's a proper onboarding program in place on what a person has to go through. So all those product training, process training, tech stack training, culture training, all that is very well defined, and there are different stakeholders who actually take care of that. So it's not only just one person's job to make sure that the new hire is feeling at home and getting engaged, but it's actually a team doing that. So they are collaborating, getting to know different departments, understanding the dynamics of how things work in a particular role, etc. So I think that's been working for us in a decent way. In fact, our ramp-up times have been better. Not sure of the exact reason why, but our ramp-up times have been better during these times as opposed to earlier. So we've done something right, but yeah, more research needed to find out those exact pinpointers or what has worked, because we've not changed a lot in the process, so to say.
I think that would be directly proportional to people being more productive from home as well, right?
Probably, yeah, probably.
Awesome. So, guys, I'll wind up there. I know there will be a lot more questions, a lot more topics that we could talk about. In fact, I think in the brief 50 minutes, we've covered a lot of things, which potentially you guys can talk more hours into, right? So I'll wind up with, just some parting notes from each of you guys, especially on the future of SaaS. How do you actually envision it? And, what do you think should work, or, advice for the people in the, who are the attendees right now? So Manish, I'll go with you.
Yeah, I've always been a big proponent of Indian software product companies from India, whether it is non-SaaS or SaaS. I think that there's a very bright future. Success of Freshdesk, Zoho, and Postman, and many, many, many others actually is a very good example. I love what Ankit talked about, the category leaders coming out of India. I think that's a very good space. The fact that it is all SaaS, cloud, remote, and being able to sell anywhere gives India a very, very dominant advantage. Super bullish. I think excited as well to see it evolve.
And Abhijit, I think you're already doing that. So what are your thoughts?
No, I completely agree with Manish. I think it's exciting times. In fact, what COVID has done is it's only given, it's equalized the whole offering, right? I mean, it's a platform now which is available to everyone. Previously, you need to be there in, say, a Bay Area. You need to do a lot of events. You need to like spend a lot of on-field investment of time and money, and just the sheer fact of being present there to be able to build a business or sell to the buyers who are locally present there. But now you can do that remotely, right? So you can build from anywhere, sell to anyone, anywhere. So, and it just helped us. I think I would say COVID was like a boon for Indian SaaS in many ways. While obviously it's a big challenge for the world all over to overcome. But in the long run, I would say it just helped the Indian SaaS. It's brought us a big opportunity. We have the advantage of cost. We have the wealth of talent that's available, and we got like great examples out there which were not there in 2010. So I believe that what happened in 1990s for IT services and it's become a multi-billion-dollar business and changed a lot of and brought a lot of people from lower middle income groups to upper middle income groups. A lot of youngsters who got into IT and then built great careers and earn great money for their families. I think the same thing is happening in SaaS, and India will become a very strong IT product nation. So completely bullish on that aspect. And the world has just become more equal opportunity for anybody to address. So very, very bullish. Yeah.
Thanks, Abhijit. And Prakhar, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, very similar. You know, everything that Manish and Abhijit said, I agree to. And just building on top, I was actually reading a report that had some stats around how the Indian SaaS ecosystem would be creating about 4.5 million jobs in the next few years, just like IT services industry has done in the past 20 years. So that's the pace it is expected to grow at. And we have a lot of benefits. You know, cost is one. Definitely, we are the, central hub of, we are a technology ecosystem in general. So our tech is our strength. And another strength that has built up with time with these IT services being outsourced to us is the customer support angle. So India can be a hotbed in terms of having that talent and having that strength with every company creating that mastery in providing customer support and services at a different level, which can itself become such a tangible differentiator for companies in the long run. So very bullish, very positive on how things are shaping up. And anybody who's not associated with SaaS actually wants to today. People are trying to learn to get into the ecosystem, because where else was that economy where you could just be here and, build something for the global world and sell it with that ease. So, yep, all very good and very positive.
Awesome. I think that was just an amazing session. I mean, a lot of learning for myself particularly. So I'm hoping that everybody also enjoyed that. I'm sure you'll have a lot more questions. You can reach out to all three of these amazing folks on LinkedIn, or, is there anything particular that you want to add just before we wind up?
I would say stay.
Yeah, and thanks for making time for this session on a Saturday evening. Right? That's the best thing. But yeah, thank you. Thanks to all you guys for making time. This has been incredibly awesome, and I think for attendees as well. Now, SaaS Talk, I think this is the first virtual event that we've conducted, and possibly we might have another virtual event before everything opens up and goes for a physical event, right? But until then, we have just opened up a networking room of sorts, which is virtual, which will be opening up right after this. So if you guys are free, if you guys want to just chat with like-minded folks, feel free to jump in on the networking thing. Consider it as just walking around a room and talking to people. So that was going to be the virtual networking part, right? So with that, we'll wind up the whole session. Thanks to everyone who joined in. It has been an incredible experience and a lot of learnings. We will definitely make sure to share the recording with everyone so that you can go back, take some notes if you missed it, and pretty much make sure the Indian SaaS future is bright, right? So I'll just leave it at that. So thank you, everyone.